Welcome to episode 5 of the AspieCast. I'm Stephen Michael, and this AspieCast is a podcast that's aiming to present real life experiences, at least those of me, and hopefully in the future those of listeners. And the goal is to just expose those and have them out there for other folks to understand and maybe realize, learn, grasp more about what other people with Asperger's are having to go through. In my case, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, this type of information has helped me feel a lot less ashamed about social interaction messes that I have been in. And a lot of those social interaction messes have haunted me for years. And when I found out about Asperger's, it was a relief, and I really came to realize I'm not the defective person that I thought I was. In this episode, I'm going to try and be a little more positive. One of the things about me maybe is that I am kind of a negative thinking person. There's good and bad aspects of that. The good aspect is that sometimes negative thinking people can be a lot more creative and innovative, and that's definitely me. But at the same time, it bums people out. And I wanted to mention at least one positive aspect of Asperger's in this episode. And then in later episodes, I'll continue on my exposing different types of situations that I've been in, and some of them are kind of ugly. Alcoholism, sexual assault, things like that. And again, I'm trying to expose this stuff only because I think that it may actually benefit other people to know they're not alone. So in this episode, I want to talk about the positive aspect of being able to see connections or to visualize connections of any sort. The connections, I would say, are usually between intangibles, things that are just concepts. And I've been able to for some reason see things that I assumed everybody else could see, in terms of situation X is connected to situation Y. And I've learned over the past few years that not everybody can see that. So and from talking to another person that I'm 90% certain is an Aspie also, he mentioned how he can see connections. And I realized that was maybe 5 or 7 years ago that I had heard him tell me this, and made me realize maybe that's a Aspie trait. And so I sometimes ask people that I think might be Aspies and ask them if they feel like they can see more connections than the average person between concepts. Anyway, I'm kind of leaving the idea of a connection kind of ambiguous, so I wanted to give a totally made-up example of a connection, just to sort of show the intangibility of the concepts that I'm talking about, and then the importance of the types of connection visualization. So here's a really goofy random example that I thought of. So imagine that you work in a company that makes blueberry muffins, and you're part of the quality inspection team, and that team has to make sure that all the muffins are coming out of the baking oven, with the proper quality. All right. Now imagine you've been doing that job for 5 years with your colleagues on the team, but in the last 6 months, the Blueberry Muffin Company's muffin sales have dropped tremendously, and nobody can figure out why, especially all the people in your quality inspection team, who are the first people to be quizzed about why sales would start dropping. So let's say you and your colleagues have made certain that the muffins are coming out of the oven with the exact same quality and taste that has always been there, and so therefore it doesn't make any sense that sales would drop. So when I talk about making connections between concepts, I'm just using this example to show two concepts. So one is the first concept being muffin quality and taste has not changed, according to the quality inspection team that's years of experience. And then the second concept is this situation where there's a drop in sales. Now, what I'm going to suggest is that an Aspie would be the first person to come up with the reason for the drop in sales before anybody else. And I just say that because I think the Aspies can make mental connections between things that are just normally not part of somebody's, I don't know what you call it, visibility, or their frame of reference doesn't allow them to go in those places that maybe an Aspie can. Now, one of the I'm gonna give a little negative aspect to this. First, I'm not going to say why the sales dropped. That comes at the end of the episode. Well, and it's made up, so it doesn't really matter. Anyways, the slightly negative aspect of that I found is that I can make some good connections and come up with some very useful suggestions, improvements, whatever, in the workplace. But sometimes I assume, because maybe I don't feel so good about myself relative to other people's skills, I assume that everybody else can see those same connections between concepts. And I talk about those things that I see, those connections, as if everybody else knows it. And what happens is it sounds like I'm being a little obnoxious, or maybe by talking as if everybody else already knows something, it is possible to come off in a way that just doesn't sound friendly, and maybe it sounds superior or something like that. And so what happens is colleagues eventually get tired of that, and they don't really want to interact with somebody. That's happened to me, I'm pretty sure, on numerous occasions. And unfortunately, people don't tell you. They just stop interacting with you, and then you realize after some time that they're not interacting the way they did when you first met or first started working together, and then you don't know what happened. And then all sorts of other things, subtend off of that, like, you don't have anybody to go out to lunch with, for example. So those are the kind of things that I've always been faced with, and, before knowing about Asperger's, I had no clue, why those things were happening. I just knew they were happening. So, what I guess I'm trying to say is that in the last few years, I've started to realize that I think I can make connections between concepts a little bit more than other people can, and I think that it's potentially an Aspie-related trait. And I also realize that I have to gently introduce those types of connections when I'm talking about them to colleagues, so that I don't talk as though they should already have realized it. And one caveat, though, is that talking about these types of connections, in any fashion, usually only works with open-minded colleagues. So when you can solve a problem in a way that connects two very disconnected concepts, sometimes you have closed-minded colleagues that will just say, "Oh, that's ridiculous," and they don't even feel like it's their duty to, or even their common courtesy to follow up in their own mind as to how this connection might be possible. So anyway, it's just been kind of interesting for me to learn that this is a positive thing about Asperger's. And one of the potential reasons that I will say might relate to this, besides maybe it's some organic, brain neuron flow things that make it more possible to make connections. One of my thoughts is that because of growing up with Asperger's, I didn't get enough exposure and forced training in modern or normal culture of the people around me. So I'm going to say normal American culture, because that's where I'm from. And that culture can actually filter what you understand, what you see, what you hear. Things can not make it into your brain in the same fashion if you have your culture telling you that certain things have to be a certain way. And I think as an Aspie, maybe you're not as connected to the world or society or your friends, so you don't have those forced filters injected into you as you're growing up, from age 0 up, and therefore you don't have as many things to stop those types of connections from being made in your brain. So anyway, I guess for me, the connections have been great because they've allowed me to sort of invent things that solve problems, and it's always gotten me a lot of good vibes at my job. People seem to like what I've done, and I've been able to make processes and in some cases computer devices that solve a certain problem and get used over and over in the future, even after I've left the job. So I'm sure a lot of inventive people out there have done that, and I think Aspies are much more capable of being that person that is inventive and problem solving and all that. In my first job, I was able to put together some off-the-shelf electronics that reads caller ID digits before most people had caller ID anywhere in the country, and then connect that to a very, very early edition Macintosh and record my voice saying certain digits. And what I ended up doing was making a thing that would announce the incoming call phone number. So and then I patched that into another thing so that you could actually call a certain phone number and have it announce what number you were calling from. So that was kind of fun because that was something that everybody started using. In my first job, both in the department that I worked in and other departments. And it was cool because my ego got boosted because lots of people were hearing me say numbers. And then that job, and actually you may have figured out, my background is in the telephone industry. That job led me to a job in the wireless telecom industry, and it was great because in the wireless industry I really had more additional interest because I used to be ham radio operator in my early teens, and by the way, that was kind of hard because I loved the whole concept of ham radio, but trying to talk to people on ham radio was just a mess. I just didn't know what to say. And if there's any hams out there that are Aspies, I'd love to find out how you feel about it. It always scared me when I'd get on the radio and try to talk to people because I literally had no concept of what to say, and I would sort of freeze. Anyway, but it was great because in the wireless industry I was able to put together concepts revolving around radio frequency and software and see connections through processes in between all sorts of different electronic devices, from a cell site all the way up to a central office switch, which is just a giant computer with millions of lines of code. And anyway, I was very lucky to have been faced with a bizarre problem where at one particular cell site somewhere in New York, every time a certain situation happened, the central office switch would start spitting out huge amounts of software error reports, and nobody could figure out what that thing was that was happening. They just knew there was something at this one cell site that was happening. And anyway, I was able to, think about it over time, and eventually figured out, a thing to test to solve it, and it worked. And it had to do with attenuating the RF radiation of a test transmitter at the cell site. And it was just cool because nobody else could have put that together, according to what I was told. And I apparently, really surprised the people at the manufacturer at the time, Nortel, that was what solved this major software bug. So imagine a software bug being solved by adding some resistance to dampen down the power coming out of a transmitter, hundreds of miles away. Anyway, so that was cool. And then I also did a voice announcer type thing at the same job, except it would say, instead of the phone number you're calling from, it would say what cell site sector you're on. And that was, for technicians to be able to, not have to go looking at any complex machinery, or not machinery, but complex analyzers to figure out which exact cell site and radio within the cell site they were on. They could just dial a number and it would have my lovely voice saying that cell site number. So anyways, that was cool. So that actually gave me confidence that I was able to do that at this job. And actually each step of the way, those kinds of connections did help me. So that first one, my first job where I was talking about making a voice announcer for caller ID, and again, that was way before anybody really had caller ID, so it was taking it from another source. That gave me the confidence to sort of move forward to another job, although it was very hard. I'm very scared of putting myself in a new situation where I might do something wrong. But it gave me some confidence, and then I got into the wireless world, and then doing those kind of things where I was able to solve some problems that spanned both the software and the wireless realm, or the radio realm. That gave me even more confidence, and then I got into a much more successful wireless company after that, and invented some software that could say how full the resources were in real time. Resources, I guess I should say, is the trunks that carry voice calls into and out of the wireless network from the rest of the world. Anyways, that was something, because I thought, there's nobody that can really see in a real easy way if this company's infrastructure is not sufficient to handle the number of users out there. And you'd think it would be really already obvious, but the traditional way to do all that is you have somebody collect lots of data at the end of the day or the end of the week, and then they put it in a spreadsheet and they make graphs. And I just thought, boy, that's a lot of hassle for something. Why not just see how to get the data as soon as you can get it, and make a web page out of it that has, the web page refreshes as often as it needs to, and tells you, between 0 and 100% if your trunks are full or not. And sure enough, that became relied upon in this company, and especially it was great because the company was growing so fast. Partly because it was the first company in America that offered caller ID over the phone. Well, wait a minute. It might have been the second company in America. The first one was the one that I had been at before. So anyway, caller ID wasn't an option on analog cell phones back in the day. Anyway, so that was great. So I had this sort of software invention, and then kept refining it, and made it show other important things that were sort of intangibles normally. And so it was just great because I felt, even more confident and willing to go into the startup world. And so that's what happened. I actually had somebody recommend me to another nearby startup company to try and sell a version of what I had done. Even though what I had done could be considered kind of obvious, nobody really sold something that did what it did. So anyway, it was great. So this other company hired me to create that as something that could be a packaged product, and so we did that, and it was great. And I learned a lot because I went into this startup company, again, kind of worried and scared about, a totally new situation, not sure if I was good enough. And at the same time, I got, fair amount of good vibes out of there, because it turned out I can actually do a good job selling product to people. I don't know how, but I'm able to sort of try and match, the concepts verbally of what my particular product was supposed to do, and I was able to match that with what potential customers would need. And the customers in those cases were other phone companies or wireless companies. Anyway, so that was great. So I guess what I'm saying here is that I succeeded, or I kept sort of moving forward in my career in good directions because of my ability to make connections and implement ways to help other people see those connections. So whether it was a connection between, knowing what cell site you were on as a technician and being able to just find that out quickly by dialing a short number, or, if it's seeing if your cell phone network is not making money as much as it could because all of the trunks are full, then I made that easy to see, just by opening up a particular web page, internal web page. So anyway, it was good, and it made me feel a little more comfortable, even though I had tons of problems interacting socially with people. And I won't say that that confidence and all that stuff was causing me any improvement, in my interactions with people. It probably, if anything, made me a little bit more authoritative and cocky, and that's not a good thing when you have Asperger's, and I'll try and talk about that in a future episode as well. But I think an Aspie with authority, or an Aspie with some, too much confidence, bad things can result from that. A little more antagonism on the part of other people than if you were just, an average Aspie who was, just sort of a lateral worker. But because of me being able to do all these, things that help sales, I sort of moved up a little bit, and eventually had some people working for me and all that. That gives you a little too much feeling of confidence, and that combined with Asperger's can really cause some bizarre effects that are not pleasant for the other people, I believe. Anyway, the other interesting thing is by being at this startup company, I was able to see how other people interact in a much more intimate setting, I guess, because it was a smaller company than the previous ones that I had been at. By small, I mean, like at first maybe 7 people, and then it went up to maybe 30, and then back down to like 20 or something. But I got to see that there's tons of people that are working in jobs, and I just assumed that, like, if you're a such and such engineer, then you must be really good at doing such and such engineering. Or if you're a technical sales executive, then you must be really good at selling, certain custom technologies. And what I found out was that that's not true, and it's bizarre, and I still don't know how many businesses succeed. And I think I'm starting to sense more when businesses don't succeed, because I'm seeing repetitions over and over of sales, for instance, salespeople not putting in the mental effort that it takes to learn what they're selling, for example, and then making mistakes that cost business later on. And if the salesperson makes a mistake, it affects the whole company. That's the unfortunate part. Affects people's salaries. But anyway, it's just interesting because I ended up making my own company, and that started about 11 years ago. And my company, I'm doing all sorts of things that are all related to the technology realm, software and network engineering stuff. And I consult for other small companies, sometimes for startups, and it's a challenge, by the way, because I have to somehow sell myself and not piss people off. So it's a good thing that I'm forcing myself to do this, but it is very hard. But I'm starting to see, when I'm, involved with another client company, I can see some of these situations, that are likely to cause the company to fail, and I try to convey it, and it's very hard because you don't want to tell your client, that they're doing the things that are typically going to make a company fail. They don't want to hear that, and nobody else is willing to say it, and so it's very awkward. But just recently, 2 weeks ago, I saw it come true. One very good idea company with a very good idea. The guy that started it just told me he was shutting it down, and it was just sad because I could see the reason why he was shutting it down, and I don't know if anybody else could, but it was strictly about some very intangible things, but how he felt about the other people that he worked with. He would treat them very nicely, but you could see where he was going. In all cases, it was all about him. It wasn't about making the other people successful. And I think I think if you're starting a company, especially a company with a good idea, you have a lot of people that really want to help and get on the bandwagon. And if you're not making every decision if you're not making every decision with all those people in mind, then and their future in mind, or with the goal of making those people's future successful, then you can run out of gas quickly in terms of being able to have the company succeed. So anyway, I'm seeing that too many times, and it's sad. And I don't understand why those people don't see it, actually. And speaking of seeing connections, there's some stuff that I don't see, and it's very controversial, and I want to just throw it out there along with the other stuff. And by the way, I do love it anytime somebody emails me. So please feel free to email me your thoughts on what I was talking about there. And then with the new stuff that I'm about to say, it is very controversial. So please don't email me if you disagree with me philosophically. Just email me if you have some suggestions that would help me or anybody else, or if you are afflicted with the same confusion. Here's the controversial thing that I don't see. Everybody in America has this sort of philosophy that they want to support the troops, and they thank everybody for their service. And I don't understand that, because the service that typically we were thanking people for was theoretically the invasion of Iraq and the ouster of Saddam Hussein. But that event, or Iraq rather, had nothing to do with September 11th. So what is the service that these people were performing that we're thanking them for? I don't understand that. So I would love it if somebody could explain that to me, because it's a pervasive, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's a pervasive aspect of all, American culture. Anytime there's a military connection or a person in the military, and you hear it on talk radio. Anytime somebody from military, past or present, is in the limelight, or or is involved in a conversation, you always hear "thank you for your service." So anyway, I only say that because I don't see that connection. I see it as a cultural thing, and if I'm thanking somebody, I feel like I have to see the connection of why I'm thanking them. What did they do for me? And by invading Iraq, I don't see that as anybody doing anything to help us. In fact, depending on who you listen to, it potentially adds more risk, because people get really pissed off when you bomb and kill their neighbors and their parents and all that for a reason that they're not responsible. So it's a really bizarre situation, and I'm happy to go further into that or not, depending on how many nastygrams I receive. But definitely would love to hear if anybody has similar confusion. And I actually talked to one other Aspie guy who was the one who introduced me to this concept of being able to see connections. He also could not see that connection, the thank you for your service, support the troops thing. Now, I'm not including Afghanistan in there. That's a whole different ball of wax. And now it's sort of that's a much more scary situation also. But anyways, I'm just throwing that out there and wondering if anybody else, if there's anybody else that feels like they can see connections but they can't see that one, or if it's just a thing that the culture is telling us that we have to understand. And if it is all about the culture telling us this, and this is how you do it, then the thank you, to me, loses its maybe it's losing its honesty, because if you're just doing a thank you for your service statement because the culture tells you, then where's the actual feeling behind that? Where's the actual gratitude feeling coming from? I want to have a real gratitude feeling if I'm going to thank somebody. And so, anyway, feel free to comment or not on that, but please don't send me any nastygrams if you think that I'm anti-military or something like that. I will say, I've worked for a fair number of military people as bosses. I mean, they've been my boss, been colleagues, and I absolutely think they have learned so much good stuff that I never learned because I was never in the military. And one of the things I believe that these folks have taught me is that there's a lot of social interaction skills that you can learn in the military, and I never would have guessed it. I just thought it was all about yes sir, no sir. But these folks are able to do some really good, management and stuff that can help a small company or a large company succeed. And it's not about running the show like it's some kind of troops on the ground that have to be yelled at to do this, go this way, go that way. It's not at all like that. It's about how to respectfully take a project from point A to point B and make sure that it all the resources, all the human intelligence gets applied in the proper way and stuff like that. So anyway, I think I'm rambling, but I guess I just want to throw this out there that I feel like being able to see connections is an advantage of Asperger's, and I want to find out from listeners if maybe if you can see connections as an Aspie, or if you know an Aspie and that person has been able to either solve problems that most people wouldn't be able to solve because of connecting different concepts, or if you think that's just that I'm just one data point that is not worth considering. Let me know. I'm reachable by email anytime at AspieCast@gmail.com, AspieCast@gmail.com, and I can't guarantee that I'll have time or be able to respond to every message, but I definitely will read each message. And I have to say that I appreciate the messages that I've been getting, started to get in recent weeks. And if I don't engage in a back and forth conversation, it's not because I'm trying to be disrespectful or ignoring you. Usually what happens is I run out of knowledge of what I should say, what is the proper thing to say. And it takes me so much effort typically to write emails that I'll put it off thinking that I'll have time to come up with the proper response, because it doesn't come organically, immediately, obviously, to my mind to know what to say. So if you are waiting on something from me and you're thinking that maybe I'm being obnoxious by not responding, that's not the case at all. Okay, and the last thing is, as I mentioned, the blueberry muffin drop in sales. Imagine an Aspie was working at the blueberry muffin company, and nobody else could sense why the sales were dropping. I believe the sales dropping could be explained by a cell site tower that was erected on the land of the blueberry orchard, because the blueberry orchard grower realized he could make extra money renting his land to this big cell site tower, and he rents it, and then all sorts of other cellular companies put their antennas on it, and he's making lots of money. And then all of a sudden, all this super high frequency radio waves are bombarding all the blueberries and changing their molecular structure, and they taste the same. So the quality team can't sense that there's anything wrong. They look the same color, but they leave a much more intense dark purple stain on the teeth of the people that eat the blueberry muffins. So over time, people realize that the blueberry muffins are staining their teeth, and so they cut back or they switch brands. And it's all because of this one grower who realized he could make more money by allowing a cell tower on his orchard land in the middle of all the blueberry bushes or trees or plants or whatever you call it. All right, that's my goofy, ridiculous story for today. And please do send your thoughts on real life Aspie experiences, either yours or anybody you know, and any recommendations that might tell you, how you would recommend people to handle certain situations, or if you don't have a solution for certain situations, that you just want to explain some experiences that you've had. That's great. The more stuff that I can get from folks out there, I can mention it on here and have much more fulfilling content, and maybe even we can get some discussions going online, written, if folks think that that's a good idea, and have a sort of a forum or something like that. Anyway, again, thank you so much. And last thing is, I'm trying to do this more often than monthly, but the podcast hosting account that I have seems to only hold enough storage space for one every month. Otherwise, I have to pay more. So eventually, maybe I can pay more, but that's the reason it's monthly for now. So anyways, thanks for listening again, and talk to you next month, probably just after the 1st of June sometime. Thanks. Take care.